Good. Um, so I want to tell you about the Rime and the Ancient Mariner, and by Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Um, and one of the reasons I want to do it is one of my earlier videos I did on a poem by Wordsworth. Um, I just kind of, I personally like Coleridge so much more that I felt like I should do it. And they were contemporaries, Wordsworth and Coleridge. They were collaborators and friends. Um, and like through my 20s, I just thought Wordsworth. It was like I had a grudge against him. I thought he was boring. Yeah, he's really boring.
Yeah.
I like him, but he's boring. Coleridge, on the other hand, is not boring. He was like this manic, crazed, like intellectually gifted. He was this talker. I always imagine him as like an Oscar Wilde type. Like everyone always says that he was like one of those perfect talkers, as if it was transcribed, it would be like prose. So it's in the first time it was published. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner was in Lyrical Ballads, which was like a collaborative little poetry book with Wordsworth and Coleridge, and it's actually a throwback. So when he wrote it, Coleridge was purposefully trying to write it to sound old-timey. So when we read it, it sounds old-timey. Whatever it was, 300 years ago, he's sitting there, however many years ago.
It was good.
200 years ago?
150 years ago?
At the end of the 1700s,
200 years ago?
200 years ago.
Yeah, 220 years ago.
220 years ago.
Let's get our math straight here. We read, we don't do math.
So like at that time, he wanted it to sound old-timey, which I just think is really neat.
But when you say old-timey, like, how, like, what, did he want it to sound like Shakespeare? Like, was there like a, like, what was old-timey to him?
Right.
Like, would it be like Shakespeare, or would it be like...
That's a really good question. I don't know.
Okay, just curious.
Like, it's sort of what I imagine is like the whole thing rocks back and forth like a sea shanty, so it's almost like that old pirate language.
Okay.
I don't know where that comes from. I don't think Shakespeare, but
no.
And the thing, like the poem is about.
I wonder if pirates would have been popular though at the time.
I don't think pirates have ever been popular. Not to sailors, anyway.
That's true. But to children, to 6-year-old boys, they are perpetually popular.
I think, I mean, one of the reasons that, one of the things that I think keeps the poem, kind of in the public eye is that sense. Like, it's a little adventure tale of this mariner, who, goes off and like a storm hits them and they get like swept up into the Arctic, and like all of these like very supernatural things happen, and it's like his voyage back home and how he survives, like certain parts, like the whole sea crew, they all die, and then something happens, they all spring back to life, and they're like kind
it's like the original Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah.
It has all these like things in it, and something that I think it's neat how much of the poem, how many lines are really famous, that like almost everybody knows them and may or may not know where it comes from. So like if you mention an albatross, everyone knows what you're talking about. You say water, water everywhere, like you just know it. Everyone knows it, and he has like a bunch of them that are in there. So
the albatross is also sort of a common theme, I think, for that. Not necessarily that period, but like it comes up in sort of like those old folk songs and everything like that, like about an albatross. It's sort of something that's been picked up throughout the years.
I'm not sure. So he in the poem, he shoots an albatross and he has it around his neck, and I don't know if that's an image that he came up with, or if that's an image that everyone already knew.
Yeah.
And he used. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like it's the earliest time I've ever come across it. But yeah, like it turns into this one of these things that is like part of your vernacular.
Yeah. Like I was thinking of like Saint Brendan's voyage, the Irish saint who like purportedly discovered the United States and Australia, and like one of the themes in his voyage is an albatross that
really?
follows him. Yeah.
Huh.
And there's a song about it, and I don't know when the song dates from, so I'm wondering like, was that a popular theme? Like, also it's sort of weird that you put a bird around your neck, but we won't go there. But like, I was just wondering like if that. It would be interesting to know how that albatross reference got started.
Mm-hmm. I would like to know that too.
Yeah.
If anyone out there knows.
Yeah, please leave a comment because we're dying to know.
So I'd like to read some of it.
That's cool.
I think, like I know for me, like when I was young, it was one of the very first poems that was great fun to read. Like. If someone is going to recommend poetry to like a young person, you just wouldn't recommend Wordsworth. Like we said, he's boring. Coleridge, like this is fun.
Yeah, I feel like when you start to read Coleridge, especially this particular poem, it's sort of like you start out with limericks as a child, and this is sort of like your first like real poem that like sort of models a limerick in that it rhymes and everything like that. But it's a little more advanced than that. Mm-hmm. It's like level B poetry reading.
I think so too. I mean, yeah. It just like...
This is Dick and Jane level 2.
Hums along like a sea shanty. You can almost imagine people like singing it in a bar or something. Like those old Irish songs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll read some of it and then just tell me if you're sick. Like stop if you want. So... The wedding guest, he beat his breast, yet he cannot choose but hear. And thus spake on that ancient man, the bright-eyed Marinere. Listen, strangers, storm and wind, a wind and tempest strong. For days and weeks it played us freaks, like chaff we drove along. Listen, stranger, mist and snow, and it grew wondrous cold. And ice, mast high, came floating by, as green as emerald. And through the drifts, the snowy cliffs, did send a dismal sheen, made shapes of men, made beasts we ken, the ice was all between. The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises of a swound. At length did cross an albatross, through the fog it came, and in it were a Christian soul, we hailed it in God's name.
I notice how when you're reciting, you're right about like the way that it sort of hums along because you're tapping your foot.
Okay, yeah.
So you're even like subconsciously, there's a rhyme and a rhythm to it because you're tapping your foot like people do with like old sea shanties and Irish music and everything. Like there is a rhythm to it because you're keeping your own rhythm as you're reciting it to me.
You just hear how fun it is.
Yeah, right. And you hear like that you can hear the beat to it. Mm. And even the beat is sort of very sort of slow and stormy and, but yeah, you're definitely right because you don't, you're subconsciously like keeping this beat as you recite it.
Do you think that's enough?
I think that's enough.
Okay, I think we're good.
All right.
Like I said, it's a great poem.
Read it.
Read it.